We're going to be trying to keep things relatively simple in today's video, as I just kind of wanted to relax and paint something fun. I've been really struggling with burnout recently, which is one of the reasons you guys have gotten so many filler videos. I've just been struggling to find my groove again as it is. I didn't take a break after the holidays this year, and I think that has taken a bigger toll on my creativity than what I thought it would. So we're starting out by mixing a bit of Fenrisian gray with some Dawnstone gray. This is just because I wanted a neutral gray with some blue tone to it, as I'm trying to mimic some images that I saw online of some mice. I wanted to have two different distinctive fur tones, and I thought using this blue gray as a neutral tone would be a really fun and interesting fur tone for a magic user. A lot of times when I think of magic users, I think of bright, vibrant colors, and I wanted to go with a bit more of a neutral tone so that this could be used for anything from like a typical spellcaster like a sorcerer all the way through to something like a warlock, which would typically be much darker in tone, at least stereotypically in my universe when I host D&D. Now I'm just going to go ahead and block out some brown on this staff. I don't really do a lot of highlights. I go a step up and I use XV88, which is usually the color that I start my leathers at, but I thought it would work really nice for just a vague highlight on this staff. Now something you're going to notice in today's video is that I didn't prime these miniatures. It's been a long time since I've painted Reaper Bones without priming them, and I've had a lot of people ask me recently if you need to prime them, as a lot of times you'll see in my videos I don't always prime my models. Now there are certain brands that I do highly recommend priming just because of the way that the paint interacts with the plastic. Now with Reaper Bones Black, you don't have to necessarily prime it so long as you wash the models nicely with some nice warm soapy water, and usually the paint will stick just fine. You want to make sure you get all that mold release off. However, you'll notice throughout today's video that I really struggle with adhesion. There is something about these pure Reaper Bones miniatures, these recycled PVC miniatures, that just don't like taking the paint. And you either have to kind of goop it on a little bit thick and do one thick coat, or you have to go back to the school of Duncan Rhodes and you have to apply two thin coats in order to make sure you get a nice finish. Now you'll know me, oftentimes I say 2 to 3 thin coats, and that's just because oftentimes you need that for the coverage if you want a nice smooth finish. However, with these miniatures, I'm also playing off the fact that the white on the miniatures is going to show through those layers. This is going to do a lot of our highlighting for us, and will make it so that we don't really need to really goop on the paint and add a ton of extra layers on some of the details. We can just leave some of that white showing through, and it's going to do a lot of the work for us, especially with the fur. Now look, I know I said I wanted to stick with neutral tones, but it's a spellcaster, and the mouse kind of reminds me a little bit of Little Red Riding Hood. So I went ahead and painted the cloak a nice bright red, and we used some orange for the highlights a little later on in the video, but we'll talk about that when we get there. Honestly, for this, any kind of a crimson red is going to work just fine. I actually mixed Scarlet Red from Vallejo along with, I think it was Mephiston red from Citadel, and that got me this really nice vibrant red that coated the miniature really well. You do want to be careful around the ears if you've already painted all of the fur, as you don't really want to have to do touch up with brighter colors on top of more saturated colors, meaning trying to cover up a mistake with the red is going to be a lot harder painting that gray on top of it, because it's going to require multiple coats. Any kind of pink will work for the tail. I knew I wanted the tails to be slightly different colors from each other, so in this case I used a pink that had a little bit more purple in it. And I actually end up painting some rings around the tail, which I end up not being a super big fan of. So I glaze back over with the color I'm using now, and that kind of dulls everything down a bit and kind of brings it back into that pink tone that I wanted the tail to be anyway. And you'll even notice with the second figure that I do that I don't even bother painting the rings on that one, and this really also helps to make the two miniatures stand out. Now, as long as we've got the pink on the brush, I go ahead and do the ears. I don't want to go super crazy with this. I don't want it to be a really vibrant pink, but I just want to go ahead and paint that in. And then I do a little dot on the nose. Now, you could also use a black color on the nose. I think it would work just fine, but I wanted a little pop of pink just to bring the eyes to the face of the miniature. And I feel like this does a really good job at helping to create a focal point for something that's this small. Now, I knew that the orb on the staff, at least personally, I wanted it to be green. I really enjoy using green in my miniatures for depicting magic. I am red-green colorblind, and the bottom end of the green spectrum tends to blend in with red for me, which is oftentimes why you'll see me highlighting all the way up into a very vibrant green. Typically, you'll see me reaching for Moot Green from Citadel, as it's a really nice, vibrant color that I can see. So if you're following along at home and you're doing something similar, it doesn't really matter what colors you're using, as long as you're using a very dark tone, a very neutral tone, something in the middle, and then a very bright tone, and you're going to be able to do something very similar to what I'm doing. Now, for this miniature, I wanted something that was more akin to maybe swirling smoke, so I'm just kind of doing circular patterns with a nice vibrant green, and then in the center of those circular patterns, I'm going back in with my darkest green, and I'm kind of glazing that darker color back in. My hope is that it will fade out to these focal points, which are these rings of vibrant green, and that'll kind of give the illusion of swirling smoke. Now, we could go the full cartoon effect and try to do like volumetric clouds inside of an orb, but keep in mind that these miniatures are barely bigger than your thumbnail, and doing something like that would be possible, but is probably more effort than they're worth. So I knew I didn't want the highlights on the cloak to be cartoonish, so I went ahead and blended the original red into my orange, and I'm just going to kind of glaze this onto one side of the ruffles on the cloak as well as on the head of the cloak. And this does a really great job at just kind of selling that highlight illusion, you know, that illusion that light is coming from one direction. And normally I would do more highlights in this, but I was actually really happy with how it looked with just doing this single pass of highlights, so I decided to leave well enough alone. Now that I had all of this done, I decided to go ahead and blend up a thin translucent layer of green that I can then glaze in on the staff, the top of the hood, and a little bit on the face, just to kind of make the orb look like it's giving off some form of light, and that this thing is giving off some kind of energy signature, whether that just be magic or it's just light. That is entirely up to the imagination of the player that's going to use this figure. I wanted this guy to kind of give the illusion of being a druid, so I decided to go with some more earthy tones, and I decided to paint the shirt orange just because I thought it would pop against all the other colors that I was going to add. It does blend in a little bit more with that tan fur coat than what I might like, and I might go back in on the fur and do a mild glazing of a darker brown just to kind of make those two colors a little bit more distinct. But for now, I was quite happy with the final result, so I think I'll leave well enough alone. Now, once again, you can see me having this adhesion problem that I was talking about earlier in the video. This color really didn't like sticking, and I actually found that by thinning it out the way that I did, I got a much more even coat. But that meant that I was going to have to do, I think, about 5 coats of this color to be able to get it nice and solid. Now, I did a quick pass with a much brighter green, almost hitting what I might call cartoonish levels of highlight, but this is because I know that when this green dries, it does dry a much darker color than what it looks like when it's wet. A lot of times when paint dries, it always dries darker, but it's really important to know your paints because not all brands of paint are going to dry in the same way. Even with Citadel, there are a lot of colors that will dry much darker than other colors. This is another good reason as to why sometimes limiting your paint palette and limiting what you use, at least semi-regularly, can really pay out, because you start to learn how certain colors work, and you know when you can and can't get away with doing something like what I'm doing and applying a much brighter color that will dry in the same range as what I want my final highlight to be. I do a bit of a dark green glaze over everything, and I do let it pool a little bit in the recesses of the cloak. This is just to kind of bring everything together. You can see I've already blocked out the pink on the tail. I've done the same thing for the nose, and on one of the paws I've painted the palm of the paw and a couple of tips for some fingers. I don't really know how many fingers mice have, but I figured 3 would be good enough to sell the illusion on the tabletop. Now, I decided not to paint the bee on camera. It's a bee. I paint the wings blue just because it works for me. If you want to paint them white, you can paint them white. They're translucent in real life, so paint them however you want to paint them. It's pretty cartoonish looking bee, so I painted it blue because I associate the color blue on wings with cartoons. That's my only logic there. Obviously it's a bee. It's yellow and black. It's striped. I don't think I really need to show that on camera. So I apply a generic brown base coat. It's watered down to the bases of these miniatures. That's because I'm probably going to mount them to a plastic base to better use for D&D to help with measuring out movement and things like that. If that's something you guys want to see, if you want to see me make little bases for these guys, let me know. I'll do a video about it. You guys seem to really enjoy when I build bases on camera, so let me know if that's something you guys want to see. In any case, I'll leave you guys with the final result.